They found them fused together like a single, shaking creature, my husband and my daughter-in-law, when the firefighters broke down my bedroom door. That morning had started like too many others in our house, quiet as a morgue, neat as a staged photograph, and heavy with a kind of hush that doesn't protect you so much as press down on your ribs. The old wedding clock my mother gave us ticked at the kitchen wall with a guiltier rhythm than any metronome. I had already learned to count by it. I could measure the distance between the life I thought I had and the one I was actually living. When Julian trudged in from his business dinner, he looked like he'd wrestled an invisible animal. The flop of jacket, the loosened tie, the exaggerated sigh, he was a practiced actor inside his own home. And I was the last audience member who still pretended not to notice the stage lights. The scent of cologne came in first, expensive and familiar, but it dragged a faint floral perfume behind it, bright as graffiti sprayed across a church wall. He fell onto the bed without showering, and soon his snoring, once a lullaby, became a kind of jeer. I picked up after him the way you do after storms. Jacket, wallet, keys, the old laptop he never updates, and the phone he pretends not to know how to use. The screen lit up under my fingers, and there it was, an email. Julian always claimed technology gave him hives. "I'd rather call," he said, as though a man born in the 20th century couldn't learn to tap out a text. But there it was, glowing like a lighthouse warning I refused to heed. I shouldn't have opened it. I opened it anyway. "You were incredible tonight, Dad." A red heart tethered to the end, like a balloon. I stood at the kitchen island, its quartz surface cold under my fingertips, and stared at that word Dad until all other words fled my brain. The email address meant nothing. A scrambled handle made to leave no fingerprints. The message, though, had the laziness of someone careless, from getting away with too much for too long. I set the phone back like a hot pan and listened to Julian turn over, huff, and resume sawing wood. The house had never felt stranger. I found a receipt in his trouser pocket as I gathered Laundry Steakhouse, San Antonio, that very night, and remembered how he'd sworn he was headed to Dallas because the partners prefer the halfway point. I pressed my lips together until they hurt. A bottle of Cabernet. The same vineyard he'd once bought to celebrate my first bakery opening. 3 decades and 1,000 dawns ago. Filet and pasta for 2. My thumb shook as I snapped a photo. The clock ticked. The ache in my chest became something knotted and heavy. I headed to the garage. His SUV still breathed out warmth, the engine's heat bleeding like a secret. I sniffed the cabin gasoline, leather, and the same treacly floral note. I opened the glove compartment. Something slick and plastic slid into my palm. It was almost mundane, the way horror sometimes shows up in cheap packaging. A half-used tube, the cap crusted with residue. Personal lubricant. A mundane thing with a monstrous context. Julian and I had not been intimate in years, but not because tenderness had died between us. That's what I told myself. He was tired. He was stressed. He was getting older. He was hollow explanations in a line, like Matryoshka dolls. I put it back where I found it, as though returning a bad dream to a drawer would keep it from waking. I found crumpled napkins under the back seat, soaked with lady perfume and smeared lipstick like a child's art project on ruin. I photographed everything and closed the doors on their stink. The next morning, he came down in a uniform of casual lies, rumpled hair, coffee breath, a pat on my shoulder, as if my skin were a pet he was fond of. "Important meeting today," he said, eyes aimed at a spot slightly to the left of my face. A man speaking to the mask his wife had learned to wear. "Might be late." He lifted his cup, sipped, set it down half full. I nodded. The way you nod to a bus pulling away without you. The day played out like a film I'd seen too many times. The bakery was a comfort only in the way old clothes can be. Soft, faded, carrying the scent of all the battles you fought while wearing them. I mixed dough, boxed pastries, talked to clients, and replayed that email until the syllables of incredible and Dad became indistinguishable. By noon, I'd messaged Mrs. Miller, who once told me she knew a discreet PI named Thomas. Her reply was fast, sharp as a rescue rope thrown across water. Meet him at noon. Tell him everything. The cafe smelled of beans and baked sugar, of life. I took a back table and watched the door. Thomas appeared like a punctuation mark. A stocky man, with a calm face, a blue shirt, and eyes that had seen too much and learned to keep it to themselves. I slid him a flash drive with the photos. Email, receipt, tube, napkins. I think my husband is cheating on me, I said. The word think clattered between us like a dropped spoon. He looked through the images, nodding, jotting notes in a small book. I'll start today, he said. You'll hear from me soon. I went home through a city that looked the same and had somehow moved 3 inches further away. That night, my phone vibrated. Thomas. A photo. Julian holding hands with a woman as they walked into a restaurant. The woman turned slightly, and the lights caught her profile, and the world tipped. Allison. My daughter-in-law, tight black dress, lipstick like a blade, hair loose. Not a grimace of politeness or chilly formality. Not the distance she always put between them at holidays as though his cologne gave her hives. Allison was smiling. Julian, my husband, looked at her like a man glimpsing a sunrise. My stomach lurched. I had liked Allison. I had taught her to make our family flan. The caramel tricky and temperamental. I had called her daughter when I felt generous, and daughter-in-law when I wanted to remember what the world was. The video arrived next. Allison leaned into his ear and whispered. He laughed. The real laugh I hadn't heard in years. The sound that first made me love him back in San Diego when we were 20 and unstoppable and stupid with future. He opened the car door for her like a gentleman in an old movie. The way she slid into the passenger seat was proprietary and new. That night, I learned the house could hold both a storm and a silence, and give neither of them away. The next day, more photos. Julian and Allison leaving a law office, her ponytail tight, sunglasses wide, playing incognito while standing in the sundae. They walked close, gravity had them by the hips. Another photo. A 4-star hotel. Glass gleaming. Gold letters, like a dare. They checked in. Thomas sent a video of a balcony embrace. A quick kiss. Curtains shifting behind them. I saved everything. I labeled files with dates and times. Little gravestones for the life I'd lived. When I closed my eyes, I saw Allison smile and the way Julian tilted toward it, and in the morning my face looked older. I was alone in the bakery when the audio arrived. Thomas had used special equipment, he wrote, to record the parking lot conversation. I put on headphones. The voices were low, but clear. Allison. Dad. Hurry up with that fake contract. I want that whole chain of stores already. I want that old hag out of the house. My fingers went numb. Julian. Don't worry. Juliet doesn't know anything. She trusts me too much. The cold that took me wasn't the ice of betrayal. It was a clean, surgical chill knowledge cutting through fog. They weren't just sleeping together. They were building a machine to grind me into chalk dust and blow me out of my own front door. My bakery. The chain I had grown one oven at a time. With bleary dawns and blistered fingers, and sweet-talking hotel managers. Into giving me a chance our bakery. My dream was a target on a wall. I saved the file. I listened twice, then a third time. To fix not just the words but the timbre of their voices in my record of truth. That evening, Julian mentioned signing some papers about a potential partner. He watched me as he said it. A fisherman watching for a bite. I smiled. Of course, I said. Later. He took more wine than his stomach could respect and snored like a man who'd never told a lie. His keys sat on the nightstand winking at me. I took them to the garage. The tube of lubricant waited where I'd left it the night before. the cap still gummy with betrayal. I brought it into my kitchen. I unscrewed a tube of industrial superglue, the clear kind we use to fix a broken chair leg at the bakery, and thought how you can repair a thing so the seam vanishes and also break a life so cleanly. No one sees the cut until the whole structure falls apart. I emptied the glue, drop by measured drop, into the lube tube, wiped the nozzle until it looked like something that belonged in a bedside drawer, shook it with a steady hand, tested a dot on paper. It glistened and slid the way it should. I replaced it in the glove compartment, adjusted the seat back, closed the door with care. In the trunk was an unused condom in a corner like a bad joke, mocking the very idea that anyone could wrap ruin in latex and call it safety. I photographed it anyway. If I was doing this, I was doing it with receipts. I put the keys back on the nightstand. In bed, Julian rolled toward me in his sleep. I used to pull him close when this happened. Return to those nights when the bed was a raft, and our bodies the only land. I moved away and stared at the ceiling until it stopped swimming. In the morning, the sun pretended nothing had happened. He drank his coffee and pretended the same. I told him I had to travel to Nashville to sign a contract and would be home late. He squeezed my fingers with a show of concern that didn't reach his eyes. "Go," he said. "I'll handle dinner." His phone lit up with a missed call. Allison Thomas. He snatched it nearly midair, flipped the screen dark, flashed me a smile with too many teeth. I packed a bag. I had no intention of taking anywhere. At midnight, I lay still and listened. He eased out of bed and padded to the living room, his phone a lighthouse in the dark. From behind the curtain, I watched him turn half away and call. "Yes," he whispered, a softness my ears had to scab over. "Come tomorrow. We won't need a hotel. Juliet's going out of town." Allison's laugh chimed, syrupy and quick. "Finally," she said. I went back to the bedroom and found Daniel's old voice recorder, the one he used in college to record lectures. I tucked fresh batteries into it, set it to continuous, hid it near the headboard behind a family photo from Daniel and Allison's wedding day. I turned the frame until it hid the cable, her veil floating like a white flag. It was nearly dawn when I slipped to the kitchen and set the last part of my plan. Oil in a skillet, a thin string tracing from the stove to the window, looped to a heavy coffee can so a tug from the yard could flip the igniter. I cracked the window. A pull test whispered smoke. I doused it, waited for the air to clear, and went to wake my husband. "I'm leaving early," I said softly. "Contract to sign." He grunted permission and rolled over. I crossed the street to Mrs. Peterson's house with my purse and a face that looked like worry. She's my neighbor and friend, a woman with kind eyes and a sharp brain. "Can I sit by your window for a few hours?" I asked. She raised an eyebrow, the way women do, when we already know the answer, and poured me coffee. At 10 a.m., a taxi slid to the curb. Allison stepped out in a floral dress and sunglasses too big for the weather of our street. Julian opened the door in a hurry and fed her inside like contraband. I put in my earbuds and opened the recorder app. Their voices came small and intimate. Giggles, murmurs, a clink of ice against glass. "We don't have to hide now," Julian said. Allison's voice sharpened. "Did you bring it?" There was a stretch of breathing, and then the sound I didn't need to hear the bed complaining. The rhythm of something I had opted out of years ago, but not like this. Never like this. When her voice pitched into panic minutes later, it was as if someone had cut a curtain with a knife. "What the hell?" Allison gasped. "We're stuck." "Shut up," Julian hissed. The old bark at a mishap he couldn't muscle through. "Wait." I slid the window a fraction more open and tugged the string. The igniter turned. The oil-kissed flame. Smoke lifted and thickened with obedient haste. "Mrs. Peterson's head snapped toward my house, Her gasp was a thin line. "Juliet, your kitchen!" The neighbors poured into their yards like petals after wind. "Call the fire department!" "Mister," Miller barked, already dialing. My heart thudded in my throat, but my hands were steady. In my earbuds, Allison's breathing went ragged. "Julian, do something. I can't move." "Stop talking," he snarled. "I'm trying." The siren keened from down the block. It's a strange thing. Pride and dread crashing into each other. When your son is the one driving the fire truck. Daniel jumped off. Uniform crisp. Face set granite hard. "Team inside," he ordered. "Possible occupants." I gripped my cup and swallowed my pulse. The front door splintered under his hammer. Boots thudded. Hoses hissed. "Small kitchen fire," someone shouted. "Contained." None of them knew the real blaze wasn't in the stove. The bedroom scene must have landed like a 30-pound weight on my son's chest. I wasn't there, but I heard everything through the recorder. A strangled "what?" out of Daniel. A muttered, "Oh my God," from a junior crewman who hadn't learned where to put his eyes. "Silence." Daniel snapped the word a whip that double-dutied as a throat saver. The neighbors crowded the yard, their mouths rounding into O's when news skittered from room to porch. Father and daughter-in-law, stuck, indecent, grotesque. Phones appeared. Mrs. Peterson's hand shook as she raised hers. But not enough to blur what the lens saw. The men covered Julian and Allison with sheets, lifted them with a care that lives miles from respect, and hustled them to the ambulance, while the neighborhood made that noise crowds make when they think someone else is to blame for knowing. I watched all of it through glass. When the ambulance doors clanged shut, I let myself run, arriving with my best imitation of shock. Daniel stood in the yard, gear heavy on his shoulders, hands open and useless. His teammates found places to look that weren't his face. The house breathed smoke out its nose, and calmed to ordinary again. We followed the ambulance to the hospital. Mrs. Peterson at my side, her silence the kind that understands there is nothing helpful to say. Hours later, the doctor came out with his hair slightly crooked, sweat at his temples. "We've separated them," he said, voice neutral. "No serious damage. Topical treatment." The nurse handed me 2 tubes of ointment with pity between her teeth. In the turn of her head, I switched them with what I'd tucked into my purse. Thick mustard. Petty? Maybe. Vindictive? Definitely. A symphony compared to what they had scored. I walked into the room and set the tubes on the tray. Julian looked gray. Allison's mascara welled under her eyes in rivers. "Juliet," he started. "But there are speeches that don't get to live once they've murdered their right." "No," I said. Left the tubes as reminders of the day's menu, and walked out. The scream came quickly. Nurses swarmed. The hallway buzzed like a hive. Everyone already knowing and pretending not to. If there's anything the internet loves more than scandal, it's proximity. Videos traveled through town, faster than my footsteps. I could hear my name in the hushes and the gasps. When Daniel arrived at the room with the folder, I'd asked him to fetch from my drawer photos, videos, dates, times, audio transcriptions, the divorce papers I'd printed quietly between pastry orders. I stood behind him the way a pillar stands behind a roof. He laid the papers on the tray, the way he sets gear down when flames climb walls, and there are lives to pull out before something falls. I met Julian's eyes. Those eyes I had kissed at 21, and stared into at 40, and learned to look past at 60. 40 years end here, I said, not raising my voice because the words were heavy enough. Sign, disappear. Allison went limp with sobs, catching at Daniel's sleeve. "Please," she breathed. "Forgive me, Daniel's face was carved stone. He turned. He left. In that moment, I could have shattered myself against the floor tiles. Instead, I leaned on the doorframe until I could move. In the hallway, I found my son half folded against the wall. Big man made small by a blow he hadn't trained for. "Why him, Mom?" he whispered. "Why her?" I laid my cheek on his hair like I did when he was 5 and burned his finger on a sparkler. "Because people make selfish choices and call them emergencies," I said, and felt the truth of it reach the back of my throat. Because we could never have stopped this. Because the only thing we can do is not let it own us. There wasn't a verse to soothe him with. There was just the living. Weeks moved in their creaky way. Word ran miles, then congealed into the simplest version. The wife who fought back. The son stripped of illusions. The father and daughter-in-law, whose skin had to be pried from each other like 2 stickers stuck wrong. My bakery was busier than it had ever been, the bell jangling constantly, the air a swarm of sugar and butter. People came with their hunger and their condolences, the latter folded into compliments about resilience, as though bravery could be piped from a bag onto a cake and set in a window. "We're proud of you, Mrs." Peterson said one morning, carrying home a bag that clinked. "You defended what was yours among all that filth." I didn't correct her. There were truths she was giving me that I wanted to borrow. Daniel moved in with me in a silence that never turned stony. He carried his duffel into the spare room and stood looking at the bed as though it were a locked door he had to learn to open left-handed. "I'll help here," he said. "Invoices, deliveries, anything." He learned the hotel managers' names, charmed the concierge, who had always thought himself too handsome to be polite, and stacked bags of flour onto racks, as though his shoulders were a pair of joke shoulders lent by a movie studio. We ate dinner side by side at the little kitchen table, rice and beans. Sometimes eggs and toast, sometimes just a slice of bread and a cup of coffee like a postcard sent from the past. "Can you make flan this weekend?" he asked one night, a thin smile trying to raise its head. "Only if you stir the caramel," I said. He rolled up his sleeves. The Saturday light came in through the bakery windows like a promise I hadn't meant to accept. I found myself saying yes to things I had spent years saying maybe to. I joined a community cooking group and stood around tables with women who have learned to laugh over pots, who know that every recipe is a letter you mail to someone you love, and sometimes that someone is yourself. I went to church and sat in the quiet that forgives you for not knowing what to pray for. I walked with Mrs. Peterson and listened to gossip unwind like a ball of twine, and refrained from wrapping it around my own wrist. A rumor will try to live in you rent-free if you let it. I chose to price it out. The thing about a big scandal is that once the loud part quiets, there's the quiet part. Lives need tending. The bakery shelves need filling. Dough needs kneading whether or not you cried before dawn. It wasn't all noble. There were mornings I hated the sight of men in ties so much, I had to go into the back and pretend to look for vanilla. There were nights I scrolled to the old photos and tried to find when the faces became masks and failed. There were moments when forgiveness flashed itself in front of me like a trick coin and then vanished, and I let it go instead of chasing it into traffic. One afternoon, between the rush and the lull, Julian walked into the bakery. He wore contrition like a cheap jacket. 2 customers stepped aside the way people step aside for a smell. He stood at the counter and placed his palms on the glass as though heat would transfer. "Juliet," he began, "when you've been with someone 40 years, you can hear every unsaid sentence in a breath." I shook my head. "You made your choice," I said. "I'm making mine." He looked around, as though the walls would whisper reasons to him. They know better. He left with none. Allison, I heard, had packed her things and her shame, and moved back to a mother who has her own opinions. Daniel served her papers with the same hand he'd used to pull children out of smoke. He didn't come home that night until late, and when he did, he put his head down on the table and knocked the salt shaker over with his forehead and laughed into his arms until the laugh broke and something else crouched behind it. I rubbed his back and didn't say it will be okay. The worst thing you can do to grief is call it temporary from outside its body. Instead, we baked an extra tray of flan in the morning and sent it to his station. and the men and women who fight fires learned that caramel can heal things water can't touch. The Grand Hotel wants to increase their order next week, Daniel said the following Wednesday, the bright back in his voice as though it had learned to recall itself. You're getting famous. Famous is a sticker, I said. Let's be reliable. We became a pair again. Different this time. Partners who choose each other because of the work, not in spite of it. He told me stories about rescues and near misses. I told him how to know when a custard is set by the jiggle. He kissed my forehead on his way out the door to a late shift, the way sons do when they have learned to take turns being the strong one. Some nights, after closing, I'd sit by the front window and watch the town exhale. The sky would hold on to color for longer than it seemed possible. Stubborn, pink gilding roofs. The clock on the wall still ticked, but the rhythm had changed. It sounded less like accusation, more like applause, the kind you give yourself when you finish doing something difficult you didn't tell anyone about. People asked me if I'd do it again, set the trap, pull the string, invite the siren. I never answer quickly. Revenge is not a mantelpiece. You don't display it and dust it and tell visitors how much you paid. What I did was a door I walked through because all the other doors on my house had been nailed shut by somebody else's lies. Would I advise someone to do what I did? No. Would I go back and leave the drawer closed when I felt plastic under my fingers? No. Because silence was killing me, and proof was the only salve. If you ever find yourself building a life on a fault line, don't blame the quake for showing up. Blame the person who told you there was no fault line at all. And then, map it. Step back. Choose your path with a mind steadier than your heart and consequences bright in your eye. I keep the flash drive in a small tin on my dresser. Labeled dates. A tidy record of a messy season. It isn't there so I can gloat. It's there so if I ever look back and think, maybe I overreacted, I can remember the breathy whisper in the parking lot. The fake contract. The plan to take the bakery I bled for. The word old hag said in a mouth I had kissed on both cheeks at a wedding. It's there to remind me that testimony matters, even if only to yourself. Some mornings, I still wish things had happened differently. That Julian had come to me before rot took root and said, I'm lonely. I'm foolish. I'm afraid of aging into someone I don't recognize. That Allison had said no to a flattery that would cost her a life. That we had all decided to stay decent. But wishing is weather. You dress for what the sky actually does. The real moral isn't that revenge satisfies. It's that boundaries are sacred. And truth, once you hold it in your hands, warms your palms even if it burns your pride. I pulled a string and made smoke. Yes. But before that, I lit a match to my disbelief. Before that, I took the shape of the life I had and turned toward the life I wanted. Every batch of flan I slide into the oven now feels like a conclusion and a beginning. There's a sweetness to it that isn't sugar. It tastes like clarity. It tastes like choosing yourself without apology. I still look at that wedding clock, the one my mother gave me, and hear it tick. It keeps time in any weather. It kept time through our first apartment with the crooked floors, through Daniel's first fever, through the day we signed the lease on a second storefront, and the day I found a tube of betrayal where maps used to go. It ticks now in a house with one fewer ghost and many more windows open. On my walk home after closing, the neighborhood is quieter. People still glance. And some of them want to ask questions they wouldn't want to answer themselves. But most just smile in a way that isn't plastic. Strong, they say. I smile back. Strength isn't the point. Integrity is. And integrity is only the art of telling the truth without screaming. The doorbell chimes and I look up to see a new face at the counter. A young woman with uncertainty in her hands. She asks for 2 slices of flan and then, as I box them, says, very softly, how did you know when to stop giving someone the benefit of the doubt? I look at her, not through her, not past her, and answer the way I wish someone had answered me years ago. When the doubt becomes a shelter for their choices instead of a bridge over yours, I say, When your tenderness becomes their disguise, that's the day. She nods, tears tight in the corners, and leaves with the box as though it weighs more than dessert. Daniel comes in from a delivery a bit later. Flushed from the evening heat, he tosses his cap onto a hook and steals a spoonful of caramel, as though he's 12. "Don't you dare," I say, swatting his wrist gently. He grins. For a moment, the bakery holds our laughter, and the clock ticks like a happy metronome. There's one more thing I learned, the lesson none of the scandal chasers will ask about, because it doesn't make a meme. It's this. You can survive a betrayal this large and remain yourself. You can be humiliated in front of a whole street and nurse tenderness back to life like a bird with a broken wing. You can teach your son that strength isn't the refusal to cry, and you can teach yourself that justice isn't always a courtroom. Sometimes it's a kitchen, and sometimes it's a woman with a plan and the steady hands God gave her. If you've listened this far, thank you for staying with me through the thick of it. Don't just take a lesson from me. Take a promise to yourself. Promise to listen when the clock ticks too loud. Promise to ask the question you're afraid of hearing the answer to. Promise not to sell your peace for anyone else's convenience. I lost a husband and a daughter-in-law I thought I had. And I found a truer version of my own reflection and the son whose heart sits next to mine when the day is done. If you ever have to choose the self who can sleep at night. Choose the house where your name is safe. Choose the kitchen where you make what nourishes you and those you love. That's the story. If it made your heart beat a little faster or gave you a sliver of courage, tap. Like to help it reach someone who needs it. Share it with a friend who might be standing at her own fault line. Subscribe for more true life stories. And tell me in the comments which city you're listening from and what part of the story shook you most.